Hey friends and digital marketers, this one's for you. I've got 30 seconds to tell you about Wix Studio, the web platform for agencies and enterprises. So here are a few things you can do in 30 seconds or less when you manage projects on Wix Studio. You can work in sync with your team on one canvas. You can reuse templates, widgets, and sections across sites. You can create a client kit for seamless handovers and leverage best-in-class SEO defaults across all your Wix sites. Time's up, but the list keeps going. Step into Wix Studio to see more. Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hanselminutes. Today I'm chatting with Dan Garfield. He's the VP of Open Source at Octopus Deploy, co-founder at Codefresh, the maintainer of Argo, and the Open GitOps co-creator. How are you, sir?
Very well, thank you.
You're having a heck of a year, aren't you? Like your year started with a bang.
Yeah, we started off with getting into this great deal with Octopus Deploy to join. The whole Codefresh team came over and joined Octopus, and they acquired our company and IP and stuff. And so that was definitely very exciting. And we were out in Brisbane in March celebrating that and meeting everybody. And then it's just been kind of continuing what we've been doing and the mission of delivering software and, working with people. And now we just have a lot more resources and team members and people working together. It's awesome.
That's very cool. Congratulations. The thing, I've known Paul Stovall for years and years and years. He's the founder of Octopus Deploy. And I remember when it was just Paul and an idea. And one of the things that always struck me was his sense of there's existing solutions, but I can do it better. And we were supportive as his friends and community members, but we're when someone does something and says they're going to start a company, you're like, you're doing amazing, sweetie. That's adorable. But Paul crushed it, has a company, and then now years later, he's acquiring other companies. That's so audacious and wonderful. And we're so happy for the success of Octopus Deploy. When you started Argo CD and Codefresh, did you have a feeling do we really need to do this? There's existing solutions.
Yeah. Well, no. I think that what we looked at was that for coming from Codefresh and then going into Argo, when you get into the Kubernetes world, and we started this when it was unclear if Kubernetes was going to win, and we knew that containers are going to change the paradigm of how people work with stuff. Sorry to use paradigm. I know it's.
I was going to say we're 2.5 minutes in and we've already hit paradigm. It's we're going off the rails.
AI buzzwords. Anyway, so we thought, hey, containers are going to change everything. And we feel like that's going to have an impact in the way that people work. And so we started from that assumption, and we started working with the assumption that Kubernetes would win. And when we had that assumption, suddenly it became clear that all of the traditional ways that we had been doing stuff for 15 years, Jenkins and all these things, they were going to change because we suddenly had kind of unlocked some new capabilities with cloud native and having a declarative format for our state management and stuff like that. That makes a huge difference. And suddenly, instead of I don't want to use an automated deployment tool because every deployment needs to be specific and hand rolled and special. Suddenly you're that causes more problems than it solves. So if we can get to a really good declarative state management, Kubernetes is going to give that to us, then we can actually do this in a much more straightforward, automated way. And we can build out support for kind of these flexibility in things, but we'll have awesome repeatability, awesome clarity. And I won't speak for Paul, but I think that anytime somebody comes into creating something where, hey, there's an established solution and everybody knows what it is. It's that's the default. You just do that. That's the thing that everybody does. You're so familiar with it that you think we could do this better. This thing, we're having to bend it. We're having to flex it to try to get it to deal with these sort of modern technology stacks. And you start thinking, gosh, I'm bending this thing a lot to try to get it to go somewhere. And I'll even go back before I even started doing software delivery professionally, I was writing software and like emailing patches to our sysadmin, so that he could manually apply them. And I kept on thinking, like, this is stupid. Like, I have version control. Like, why can't I use version control to just like check out the changes on the server? And as I like looked around, like, I couldn't find anybody doing that. And I was like, I just must be dumb. I just don't know what the solution is. And then it took a long time to be like, oh, actually, that is the solution. we just hadn't. It's just that all these solutions, they don't come in chronological order. You have pieces come here and there. And then when you fast forward 5 years and you look at all the pieces you have, you're like, oh, actually, there's a way better way to do this. But it's not clear when you're in the middle of that.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful, though. That really resonates with me. That the irony that you're like, I must be stupid, so I'll go and invent an entirely new thing that will be better. You know what I mean? Like the juxtaposition. But I think we've all felt like that, and also the stretching and bending existing paradigms. Sorry again for paradigm to fit. It's like that's your first sign that I shouldn't have had to push that square peg into that round hole as hard as I did. I realized that it fits, but I really had to push hard. I'm going to fix this. Yeah. Either make a new hole or make a new shaped peg.
Yeah, totally.
I think the first time that I was like checking something into Git and pushing it live was pretty much like Heroku, early days. Check it into main, push it, and then magically it shows up online. When did we start really formalizing the relationship between Git and DevOps and calling the operational framework, GitOps?
Yeah, so GitOps as a term was originally coined from Weaveworks, and specifically Alexis Richardson coined the term because his team had been working with Kubernetes and they had an incident and an outage, and he noticed that everything had been saved in Git, and so they were able to kind of restore really quickly. And he was like, "Oh, well, that was pretty amazing. Like, we had this outage, but we were able to restore really fast." And so the discussion started around like, if you have Git as a source of truth, like we do that for applications, and for infrastructure, you try to do it. Tools like Terraform get you like a lot of the way there, but the other side of the equation is, of course, that you lose the state of what's actually happening in your application. And that creates problems, right? So if you don't know what's actually happening with the live state of your infrastructure and you go to make a change, you may be trying to push to a server that doesn't exist anymore. Or you may be relying on an IP configuration that's no longer valid or whatever. And so if you can get into a place where you can monitor both the live state and the desired state, and then you can constantly be kind of reconciling and figuring out, okay, I need to reapply the desired state, or I need to send an alert or whatever, that becomes really powerful. So this effort to formalize GitOps started in, I think, 2019, late 2019, late 2020. And we thought, DevOps has come to mean anything, everything, and nothing. And so that's why every 6 months or a year, there's an article that's DevOps is dead, long live DevOps, because some aspect of it is revolutionizing or whatever. And that can be a challenge because when you want to go and actually use the thing, you suddenly are running into conflict about what it is. And so we formalized and created a group called the GitOps Working Group under the CNCF, and we invited a bunch of companies to participate. So when we started it, it was Codefresh, Azure, GitHub, Amazon, Weaveworks, and then Red Hat joined shortly thereafter. And so once that initiative started, we gathered feedback from the community, and we had, I think, about 80 different companies participate, over 120 some interested parties come in, and we just came in and just hashed out and said, like, okay, within this room, there's a collective like 1,000 years of operations experience. Let's distill that into GitOps principles, where Git is the source of truth and what that means, and make it really simple. And we ended up with 4 principles that are very, very simple. And if you check all those boxes, it really does make this massive impact on your software delivery. And so it's a lot kind of like the Agile Manifesto in a way, where there's kind of a clear founding document that you can look to. And that has made a big difference in helping people adopt it and understand, okay, Git can be a source of truth for my operations. I need to have a reconciliation engine that can monitor live state and monitor for drift. And there might be policies about delegating control where like, I want to have an auto scaler that is dynamically changing the number of replicas that I have on my pods. And if I'm going to do that, then I want that to be ignored by my, what's in Git necessarily, because I'm kind of delegating control. So you get into these things that are sort of meta state management that are meant to be flexible. But all of that stuff, I mean, that was really formalized. And I think we got to 1.0 by like 2021. And it's grown from there. We've had GitOps has been very successful, many of those. And of course, Argo CD is the most popular GitOps tool to come out of that era. The Argo CD actually started before the standard was formalized.
I was looking at some old papers that I wrote in 2006, 2007, when I was working in finance, and the idea of like the bank getting out of sync with like the staging site and the production site was a huge problem at the time. So we were trying to we hadn't named it yet. We were trying to figure out what like desired state configuration would be. So people kept writing Word documents. And at some point someone said, I don't think the Word document is going to break the build. And that like really stuck with me. Like we have all these documents that describe desired state, but a Word document or a Google Doc cannot break the build.
Yeah, because it's not part of the build.
Exactly. So I feel like that idea of bringing it into, its own place, its own dedicated Git repository alongside the code repository, and expressing the state in such a way that it's code, again, whether it be Pulumi or Terraform or whatever. The complete source of truth is in one place, and it can break the build, and we can have gated, as many gates as our company or our organization needs. It's such a great idea. And it makes me wonder, like, man, what were we putting all that in a Word document for so many years ago? What were we thinking?
I mean, I feel like anything that goes down to policy should be in Git. You know what I mean? Like wouldn't it be cool if, not to get into politics, but like when somebody put in a bill, it was just a pull request? And like, oh, here's the diff, and like here's who's all supporting it, and here's all the people that made commits on this. You can see all the people. It's like, man, I want that for everything. Like I want everything to be auditable, trackable, clearly. You can end up with a formal document that's very simple to read. It just shows the differences. You don't have to have declarations and stuff. I mean, it's nice.
Given how many times that I've had to go and like Git reset hard head, I wonder though if our senators and our Congress people would be able to pull that off.
Well, I don't think they do any of the mechanics of getting the bill
let
in.
The interns
do
that. Yeah, let the interns
do interns.
It's a great metaphor though, and I've tried to explain that. Like for some people, it just clicks, but there are those that just it hasn't clicked yet. But it is such a wonderful metaphor, and it would work like that. So Argo was doing its thing. They started in 2017. They saw the light when the working group came together and started making it more formalized. Now you've got Argo workflows, Argo CD, Argo rollouts, and stuff like that. So then where does Codefresh fit in, and how did Codefresh join Octopus Deploy?
Yeah, so with Argo, this was started by a company actually called Applatix that a lot of us were friendly with. Raziel, our CEO of Codefresh, and he's the founder. I'm a co-founder, but he's the founder, But so we were very familiar with those guys. They started in 2017, and I remember going to the meetup where they first presented what they were working on, and it was what would later become Argo workflows. I thought, this is kind of interesting. There's some kind of primitive components here that are potentially interesting. They didn't really find a market per se. So in early 2018, they were acquired by Intuit, who had started to adopt some of this to help them run their own data flows for basically using Argo workflows. And then Argo CD launched right after that. We joined the project, and as Argo came into the CNCF, and then helped sponsor graduation and push it forward from there. And so we've been pretty heavily involved from the very beginning. And when it comes to Argo CD, we actually launched the first commercial Argo version of Argo CD way back in 2020. And that's Argo CD was less than a year old as we launched that. And so suddenly we started getting a lot of experience with companies adopting GitOps, adopting Argo, the challenges that they were running into. And that goes into some of how we refined kind of GitOps as a standard and added components to it over time. And then things that we've done to add into Argo CD. And so we've just had a lot of experience working with companies. I think we've worked with more companies to help them adopt Argo CD and GitOps than anybody else on the planet. I think we've done it in more diverse use cases. If it's edge, if it's in the cloud, if it's on-prem, if it's behind the firewall, whatever. So we've just been spending a lot of time on that. And fast forward to just last year, we ran into Paul at KubeCon, and he came by the booth, and we had this big crowd of people who were there to see demos and see what was going on. And he was like, wow, there's a lot of energy here. Like, what's happening? And this is really interesting. And so we started talking to Paul. And as you're very familiar with Octopus Deploy, and most of your listeners are very familiar because Octopus Deploy started kind of focused on this .NET group and Windows deployments, and they became actually like really great tool for working with VMs and infrastructure. And we've always been weaker in Codefresh on that side because it's been like, hey, once you got the cluster, GitOps and all that stuff. And we have solutions to work with, if CI/CD pipelines, build pipelines, and you can do Terraform, you can do that stuff. But what Paul had built was just really impressive and really powerful. And he's looking at, okay, we see more and more users adopting Kubernetes. And as they adopt Kubernetes, most users that use Kubernetes are deploying using Argo CD. I think it's a little over half of all deployments of Kubernetes are probably using Argo CD. That's an estimate based off of a CNCF survey. There's a little bit of extrapolation there, so it's not a perfect number. And number two is like, it's like 10%. So it's a very much like Argo CD has kind of won that. And so when Paul approached us, it was, we love what you're doing with Argo CD. We love what you're doing with GitOps. We think it's really cool you have CI/CD. And these are areas where we think Octopus could really benefit from, because as we expand the mission to deploy software and manage software delivery, having a cloud native solution that is already has some embrace from the community would be of really great strategic value. So it made a lot of sense, I think, for both us and him, where now our users can get access to all these cool tools from Octopus, and their users can get access to our tools. And so far it's been awesome. I mean, we're August, we got acquired in March, so I think the honeymoon is over-ish, but I think we're still very happy with how it turned out and really grateful to work with. I mean, their team is just awesome. They've been really great.
Yeah, they're so pro. And the other thing that's great about Octopus Deploy and Paul, because I think it starts at the top, is a real community focus.
Oh yeah,
and just caring about what the community wants, listening to the community. So the idea that these two like very strong community projects have kind of come together into one thing is super cool.
Yeah, and that's actually another thing that was really cool for me is, when Paul first approached, and in any potential acquisition scenario, what we're doing with open source is pretty important. We help maintain Argo CD, Argo rollouts. We're the number one security contributor to Argo CD. We've been pretty heavily involved and especially in building the community and running ArgoCon and all that stuff. And have been one of the big drivers of the project. And so coming with Paul, it was like, okay, so like, how do you think about open source? You guys haven't, you're not like what we would view as a traditional open source company. There have been a lot of cool open source projects from Octopus over the years, but it's not like an open core model necessarily, like a Red Hat or something like that. And they were like, we're pretty excited about it. Like, we think Argo is really cool. And they actually, as part of the acquisition, made a commitment to say, hey, we want you to go continue to build open source. We want you to expand the team. So I've been able to hire additional Argo CD maintainers, and I just had another one start this last week, and I've got another job opening in the open source community. So that's been really cool for me. I don't know if other people care about it as much, but in any investment into open source that is yielding better results for the community, better results for everybody, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is cool. I do want to back up a little bit because you did throw out a buzzword that I want to dig into a little bit. You mentioned the edge, and Kubernetes traditionally has been the big thing in the cloud, and it is the way that you get things into the cloud. But more and more, I've actually got a Raspberry Pi stack here. I've got
Nice.
Kubernetes on my Raspberry Pi, and I was talking to somebody at a local grocery store who's a buddy of mine who's an IT guy, and they've been doing AI models locally because they wanted to be able to like have cameras on the shelves and see whether or not the food has run out. But it was ridiculous to send all of that data off into the cloud. So they moved all of those AI models locally, and they ended up with a Kubernetes stack in the back of my grocery store. And I was like, Really? Wow. I mean, I guess that makes sense. But I don't know. I would worry about deployments going wrong, and you could have thousands of grocery stores. But that is the edge, isn't it? Like my local
Yeah.
grocery store.
Yeah, local grocery store. I mean, it's I've talked to people before who are like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I talk about, "Oh, well, we make software, Codefresh, Octopus Deploy," and they don't know what it is. And I'm like, "You've used it. You've used it dozens of times per day. You don't know about it. Maybe you were at." Speaking of Argo, GitOps, let's generalize it to Kubernetes so that I'm not necessarily sharing, a customer or anything specifically, but Kubernetes in general. Every time you go to Starbucks, there's a local Kubernetes cluster in that store. There's one in Chick-fil-A, in every Chick-fil-A. There's most retailers, most restaurant big chains are adopting Kubernetes in each store to run all the local services. But it's not just on retail locations, which of course that would be, that's a pretty large group of people using the Kubernetes, but it's also on vehicles like the F-16. Famously, the Air Force rolled out Kubernetes in their F-16s to manage stuff. So we also see it in container cargo shipping, ironically, right? Container boats, because it makes sense, right? Like, what do I need? I need a compute platform that is super reliable, that's resilient, and it's easy to manage with large scale and large replication. Well, if I deploy, a 2 or 3 node Kubernetes cluster into an edge location, I can literally have 1 or 2 nodes potentially burn out. And this thing is still going to be running. It's just going to migrate workloads and it'll be fine. And you're getting clarity about what's happening. And the compute itself isn't expensive. I mean, you're mentioning Raspberry Pis. You can do a stack of Intel nukes, whatever. So it's not like, in a lot of these cases, the Kubernetes clusters are relatively inexpensive. Not always. Some edge use cases require, like you mentioned, local ML. So that's going to be a more expensive platform, right? But you get all of this reliability, and then for managing it at scale, Argo CD and what we've been doing with GitOps is very popular because you can basically have your source of truth in Git, and you can have your edge cluster pick up the update as soon as it has an internet connection. So maybe it doesn't while it's crossing the ocean, or maybe it doesn't while it's in for service, or the power is out, or the internet is down, or whatever. But when it comes back online, it'll pick up, and you get this wonderful resiliency. And it's a lot better than a big, single point of failure in the cloud, because these components end up being very, very reliable at the edge. So everybody's using it already. They don't know it necessarily, but I guarantee everybody listening to this has used Kubernetes multiple times today. And yeah, you'd be surprised in how many places at the edge that it's actually running things.
It's so funny because I feel like maybe I'm just old, but like I can imagine a device, let's say like a thermostat, running a small HTTP server. But then if I think, oh, that's thermostat could be running Kubernetes, I think to myself, oh, that's going to be too much. That's too much for it to do. That's too heavy. That's too whatever. I'm thinking of excuses of why that. Like you just mentioned, like an F-15 or whatever. That's legacy hardware. And now, and I guess they rolled that out in like less than 2 months. Kubernetes, I guess I need to get it in my head that Kubernetes, and by extension GitOps, is less heavyweight than I feel that it is. These are lightweight solutions, and they're solutions that people can put together quicker than they think they can.
Yeah, there's definitely like we always compare Kubernetes to snowboarding, where it's like your first day of snowboarding, like it sucks. Like you're just gonna eat it. You're gonna be in pain. You're gonna be, you're gonna have bruises in places you don't know you could have bruises. You're gonna be sore. It's rough. But like once it clicks, you're just having fun and you're moving down the hill, and it's a lot easier to kind of get really good at snowboarding. Whereas skiing, it's very easy to kind of stand up and start going down the hill, but like getting your knees and your form and stuff properly, it's a lot more difficult to get really good at skiing. I say this as a snowboarder. So I feel like Kubernetes is like that, where, yeah, you didn't have to think about like PVCs and how the ingress provider works. And, if you're using a service mesh or whatever, like you didn't necessarily have to think about that stuff in the past. You had to find solutions for all those things eventually. And if you wanted to scale it, if you wanted replication and failover between nodes, then you had to solve all these problems. And they were actually much harder to solve without Kubernetes than with Kubernetes. And then when it comes to the state management, It's like, yeah, man, running like apt-get update, apt-get upgrade, that's pretty easy, right? And I can install some packages and I can do that. But once you embrace kind of the cloud native way of working, where it's like, no, I just told it like what I want it to be, it's going to figure out how to get there. It solves so many problems. And I have my edge cluster here behind me. I've got a stack of a 3-node Kubernetes cluster back here that runs all my local services. So I dog food my own edge use cases. And I also have some AI workloads over here too. So yeah, we're doing it.
I think it's so funny that in a time of the cloud where everyone took their Linux box that runs under their desk and then threw it up into the cloud so they don't have to see it anymore, that we're seeing a resurgence in home labs. Like everyone's like, okay, I'm uncomfortable now. I haven't seen my cloud. I'm going to go ahead and bring it back. Because I've got a whole half rack, and I've got my Synology NAS, and I've got Portainer on it, and I've got the stack of pies and all this kind of stuff. It's like, after a while, not seeing it makes me uncomfortable. So then it's like, I need to see what they're doing. So I love that you have that rack behind you, or like Intel NUCs or things like that.
Yeah, well, it's definitely more work. You can be more cost efficient in your home lab than if you just deployed it to the cloud from a pure cost standpoint. But it's part of that is because I'll let my hardware get older than they would let it get in the cloud, right? Like I'll let my, I'm willing to accept some vagrancy in my local setup.
So ArgoCon North America is coming up in a couple of months here, November 12th in Salt Lake City. What is going to be talked about at the con this year?
So we just finalized the schedule. When does this podcast go out?
People will probably be listening to this in the middle of August.
In the middle of August. Oh, so in like 2 weeks?
Pretty soon.
Okay. So I won't necessarily say who is going to be speaking because we just finalized the schedule and we're now notifying speakers starting like tomorrow. So by the time people listen to this, we should have the schedule pretty close to being public online. But I will tell you that there are quite a few really recognizable end user companies that have been doing some really cool use cases with Argo, not just Argo CD, but Argo workflows, Argo rollouts, Argo events. So there's quite a few of those people that are going to be there to share stories, things that worked really well for them, some case studies. We also have some really cool content coming, some talks that I'm very excited about on like failure cases. So one of the great things, double-edged swords of GitOps is if you have the power to create the universe in a single command, that bootstraps everything from Git, it also means you kind of have the power to destroy the whole universe in a single command, right? So like the more powerful your ability to create, the more powerful it is to destroy. So we do have a talk that that's coming on like how to avoid potential catastrophic failure conditions that I think is going to be a lot of fun. That's somebody on my team is going to be talking about that one. So that one's pretty cool. We're going to talk a lot about scalability, ephemeral environments, getting clarity on changes before they go up. So yeah, it'll be pretty cool.
That's very cool. And there's going to be a bunch of co-located events as well. And I noticed that for folks that may be in university or may be academics, that the academic price is really, really, really nice, $200. So if you're in school, you're in or around the area, definitely $200 is a heck of a deal for a ton of content.
Yeah, and it's in Salt Lake, which is where I'm talking to you from right now. So come visit my town. You're very welcome.
Very cool. Well, I'm so happy that things have worked out well for you at Octopus Deploy. It seems like it was just the match made in heaven. It's so cool that it was just last year we were like hanging out with Paul at the booth, and now the future is bright.
Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah, we're really excited about it.
Well, thank you so much, Dan Garfield, VP of Open Source at Octopus Deploy, for chatting with me today. This has been another episode of Hanselminutes, and we'll see you again next week.